Canada's Minister of Veterans Affairs, Erin today tabled legislation he says will respond to complaints from some of Canada's wounded veterans. As part of the package, he announced a new benefit of up to $70,000 for Canada's most seriously wounded soldiers. The one-time tax-free payment is called the critically injured benefit. The minister says the aim of the top-up is to bring veterans' compensation in line with what the courts have granted seriously injured people under civilian regimes, such as workmen's compensation. Joining me now is the Minister of Veterans Affairs, Erin O'Toole, who's in the studio. Minister O'Toole, let's start with a question that a lot of people have, and that is, who is going to be eligible for this new top-up, this new benefit?
Well, and we're making this retroactive, so there's going to be any veteran covered by the new Veterans Charter in April 2006 through to today and going forward that's injured in a sort of traumatic episode in their operational service, whether it's on deployment or in training. If you're seriously injured and that injury then leads to a long recovery, with hospitalization, potentially surgical intervention, long period of rehabilitation. This is a new benefit that actually is slightly different than your introduction, Martin. This is a benefit that's not about the disability award. It's not about the so-called lump sum.
But it tops it up.
Well, this is a new benefit to recognize and compensate for that recovery itself. What the new Veterans Charter is meant to do is to provide a continuum of care for the veteran. And what was lacking in our assessment as a government was that recovery piece and that road to wellness for the veteran. So we found some instances where someone in a critical injury, but because our healthcare was so strong and field ambulance support, all that sort of stuff was so strong, if they didn't have a permanent disability, at the end of the recovery, they got a very low disability award.
Right.
This will rectify that by recognizing that period in hospital, that sort of recovery and the stress and pain from that, and this is compensation for that.
Well, some people have called it the pain and suffering. I mean, it qualifies as that?
It recognizes the pain, suffering, and stress of the traumatic incident and the recovery, so the hospitalization, the surgeries, the physical rehab, that sort of thing.
Number of people who might qualify. You mentioned it is retroactive, so it's going back to all the people, including under the Veterans Charter. Number of people.
Department estimates is over 100 right off the bat with the retroactivity, and then going forward, this is a new statutory benefit that will be there whether there's one person in this sort of traumatic injury criteria or 100 in a year. Going forward, it'll really depend on the operational tempo of the armed forces, but it's important to say it's not just deployed people injured in Iraq or Afghanistan. If you're seriously injured in some of the training exercises, that happens a few times every year, this is for people in the reserves and reg force injured as a result of their service.
You know that veterans who are angry, though, about the Veterans Charter, and you say this now applies to everyone under the Veterans Charter, people who are angry at the Veterans Charter, those who were disappointed or don't like the new one lump sum payment system, how does this change that? Because some vets will continue to be angry about, they would have preferred a lifelong payment system. This is the argument we hear from some disgruntled vets, that they don't like the one lump sum payment. How does this change anything?
This will be enhancing the new Veterans Charter. Martin, in the last few weeks, I've rolled out a series of benefits or programs that fix gaps in the new Veterans Charter. This isn't a gap. This is an enhancement that we feel is important. Where we're going is actually to have a superior system to the old Pension Act system. I've already announced the retirement income security benefit, so taking care of the elimination of earnings loss for seriously injured veterans at 65. And at that announcement, I said, I want to roll these benefits together into a streamlined pension for the most seriously injured. For those that are not moderately to severely injured, that may leave the Canadian Forces because of more minor injuries from service, the new Veterans Charter is already superior than the old system, because if you had a 40% disability under the old system, that wasn't enough to live on. It might have been lifetime, but it wasn't enough to live on. The new Veterans Charter is about rehabilitation, getting someone back to work. We're topping up seriously injured because they will have the hardest time transitioning to a post-military career.
One of the obvious questions is this issue has come up in the legal case, the law case that is basically pitting the federal government, your department, against a group of veterans. They are suing. Now, I don't know, you can tell me what the status of that legal case is, but part of that is about claiming that they're not getting the equivalent benefits that they would get in civilian life. And that's why I mentioned in the introduction workman's compensation. It's before the courts. Where is that case now, and how does this possibly relate to that case?
Martin, as both a veteran and a lawyer, I don't want to comment on a specific case, but I think you will see, and the folks involved in that, the Equitas group, raise some issues alongside the Ombudsman and other people of areas that they thought were gaps in the new Veterans Charter. I fixed many of those gaps in the last few weeks. The Prime Minister gave me a mandate to make sure that we fix the gaps, but also to enhance the new Veterans Charter. And in our legislation I brought forward today, we're doing that. I also specifically want to highlight the fact that we put a purpose clause in this bill, Bill C-58, that shows that we have an obligation to our veterans and their families, and that we have to give them just and due appreciation for their service. That's Robert Borden's line. So we recognize this, and the Veterans Charter, as we evolve, will make sure that we constantly make sure that we're providing for our injured.
Last question, you've been asked this before, but today is the day, as you say, you wrapped it all up and tied it up with a bow tie, with a ribbon. The legislation was tabled today. It's all included so far, all the announcements to date. But why is it taking this long?
Well, when the All-Party Committee released their report on the new Veterans Charter last June, we moved quickly on a number of things in the fall, saying we recognize, all parties agreed, the NDP, the Liberals, our government. Some things took longer to develop legislation, develop a benefit framework. The retirement income security benefit, the 65, and trying to move towards a pension for our most seriously injured. These are a complex set of not only financial commitments of the government, but programs designed to actually fill policy gaps. We took the time to get it right. I said as minister, I would rather get things right and take the time to get it right, to fix things, to improve things, than to rush things. And so what this bill represents today is fixing the gaps. We're enhancing the new Veterans Charter, and we're showing it's a living document, and it's our pledge to veterans and their families to constantly evaluate to make sure that we give best-in-class care, that we look at new needs as they arise, like mental health. So we're committed to that.
Okay, Erin O'Toole, I thank you very much for coming in. Thanks for explaining it to us.
Thank you, Mark.